Something wasn't right at Buckingham Palace that morning. Black cars arrived in silence. Curtains were drawn. A select few senior royals were summoned, no aides, no press. Behind those closed doors, King Charles had reached his breaking point. What triggered this royal emergency? And why was the Princess of Wales at the centre of it all? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. There was a stillness in the air that even the seasoned palace staff hadn't felt before, a kind of silence that clung to the gilded corridors like fog. The Queen's private entrance remained sealed. The usually bustling royal kitchens operated at half their normal rhythm. And then, as if on cue, 3 blacked-out Jaguars rolled into the side courtyard, each one carrying someone with a key to the monarchy's survival or destruction. Only senior figures entered: Princess Anne, the Duke of Edinburgh, and the Archbishop of Canterbury. Prince William was noticeably absent, a detail that set off alarms among insiders who knew what such an exclusion could mean. It wasn't a routine strategy meeting. It wasn't a ceremonial formality. This was a war council, and the enemy was allegedly someone within the family. For weeks, Catherine's behaviour had been the subject of quiet murmurs in the palace's private corridors. Her public engagements, though graceful as ever, had taken on an undercurrent of assertiveness that didn't go unnoticed. There was the incident at the climate summit, where she publicly corrected a senior advisor. The eyebrow-raising absence from a royal banquet, replaced without explanation. And most recently, the cutting of a planned joint appearance with Queen Camilla, a change that reportedly followed a heated exchange behind closed doors. Some whispered that the two women had finally clashed, their differing visions for the monarchy too vast to bridge. Others insisted Catherine had made it clear she would not bow to an outdated power dynamic that placed her beneath a stepmother she never truly embraced. The Queen Consort, fiercely protective of her territory, was said to have left that confrontation visibly shaken but determined. Within 24 hours, King Charles was informed. And what he heard left him, according to one aide, gravely displeased. He wasn't just disappointed. He felt blindsided, betrayed by the very woman he had come to rely on as a bridge to the modern public. The gravity of Catherine's words and actions had crossed an invisible threshold. This wasn't just a family matter anymore. It was a constitutional dilemma. Could a future queen consort defy the reigning monarch and his wife without consequence? To those few brought into the emergency meeting, the instructions were clear: silence outside these walls, loyalty inside them. There would be no room for emotional wavering. King Charles reportedly opened the session with a firm declaration the crown must hold. The implications were chilling. Catherine, the woman once considered the monarchy's most stabilizing force, was now at the center of an unfolding storm that could fracture the royal family's public image beyond repair. And as the conversation behind those gilded doors turned toward protocol and punishment, one burning question lingered in the air. But what exactly did Catherine do or say that sparked such an unprecedented royal crisis? The answer lies in a private moment that should never have gone public. She had followed the rules for years, smiled, curtsied, endured. But during a recent private dinner, Catherine broke protocol, and possibly the monarchy itself. Her words, overheard by a royal staff member, led directly to King Charles's shocking decision to summon his inner circle. It was supposed to be an intimate evening, a gathering meant to reflect unity after weeks of tense headlines and whispered speculation. Yet as the family assembled for what should have been a simple meal, the air was already electric with unspoken grievances. The seating arrangement alone suggested hierarchy. Camilla positioned herself opposite King Charles, while Catherine sat beside William, her posture poised but distant. Courtiers described the atmosphere as frozen elegance, every smile laced with tension, every toast falling flat. What unfolded next would never be fully captured by press briefings or polished statements. According to one insider, it began when the conversation turned toward upcoming state appearances, specifically Camilla's growing role as the monarch's senior representative. That's when Catherine, usually reserved in private gatherings, did the unthinkable. She pushed back. Accounts vary, But all sources agree on one thing: her words were clear, deliberate, and devastating. She addressed Camilla directly, questioning her repeated vetoes of joint engagements and hinting at manipulative interference in palace scheduling. Then, with a calm that stunned the room, Catherine reportedly uttered the now infamous line, "This is not your throne to protect nor mine to serve." In that single sentence, she had severed more than tradition. She had challenged the very balance of royal power. The room fell silent. William, stunned, reportedly reached for her hand under the table. Camilla, however, said nothing. Her expression betrayed no emotion, but she rose moments later and walked out, leaving her unfinished wine and an entire institution trembling. What happened after was a blur of coded phone calls, closed-door whispers, and hastily rearranged calendars. Camilla's departure from the dinner wasn't merely an exit, it was a message. Within the hour, her personal assistant was seen phoning Clarence's house. By morning, aides across 2 palaces were caught in a storm they hadn't seen coming. Those loyal to Charles aligned quickly behind Camilla, briefing him on the quote, the tone, and the implications. Those who quietly sympathized with Catherine remained silent, knowing full well the dangers of picking sides in what now felt like an internal war. One staff member, who had overheard part of the exchange from the corridor, leaked fragments of the conversation to a long-time royal correspondent. The palace's attempt to suppress the leak only added fuel to the fire. When King Charles was informed of Catherine's words, his reaction was swift and visceral. Insiders say he was both furious and hurt, furious that protocol had been broken so publicly within his own home, and hurt that someone he had once privately called the family's quiet pillar had now become its most visible threat. He reportedly walked alone for hours through the palace grounds, struggling to make sense of the growing fracture between his wife and his future queen-in-waiting. One decision emerged from that long, bitter night: there would be consequences. And so, within days, the call went out for a confidential council, one designed not only to assess the political fallout, but to prepare for something far more dangerous: the possibility that the royal family was no longer aligned behind the throne. The Princess of Wales may have spoken her truth, but it came at a cost. What followed was a series of decisions that would divide the royal family and test alliances never meant to be exposed. Not since the abdication crisis has the royal family been this divided. What began as a personal disagreement has erupted into a full-blown institutional crisis, with the firm split down the middle and Catherine caught in the storm. In the aftermath of Catherine's pointed confrontation and Camilla's swift, silent retreat, a tidal wave of loyalty tests swept through Buckingham Palace. Queen Camilla, whose influence had always been discreet but potent, moved quickly. She didn't need to raise her voice. She had her people, those loyal courtiers, senior aides, and discreet aristocratic allies whose allegiance had been nurtured over decades. In hushed meetings and subtle directives, Camilla made it known Catherine's insubordination would not go unchecked. The inner court began to turn. A quiet campaign emerged to reframe the narrative. Catherine, though popular, was now being painted as emotionally erratic, politically naive, and dangerously modern. Royal insiders began questioning her readiness for the crown. Some even whispered that her appeal to the public had become a liability, threatening the balance of tradition and control that kept the monarchy intact. Behind palace walls, discontent fermented. Prince Edward and Princess Anne, once the quiet workhorses of the royal rota, found themselves uneasily pulled into the maelstrom, though neither was eager to tack. E-sides both reportedly voiced deep concern over the spectacle unfolding before them. Anne, ever the realist, warned that letting private feuds spill into public perception was reckless. Edward, more guarded, confided in aides that the current atmosphere reminded him of the chaos following Diana's untimely death, a monarchy on the brink of emotional collapse, drifting without a clear anchor. But their words carried little weight against the escalating power play between Camilla's loyalists and Catherine's swelling influence beyond the palace gates. And that influence was no longer subtle. Across Britain and beyond, Catherine's image graced headlines, magazine covers, and digital campaigns, not because she asked for it, but because the public demanded it. Her strength in silence, her poise in conflict, Her unwillingness to retreat from scrutiny, all of it fueled a narrative of resilience. For many, she had become the people's modern monarch in waiting, and that, more than anything, unsettled the traditionalists. King Charles, already walking the tightrope between a wife asserting her place and a daughter-in-law refusing to be silenced, now faced a deeper crisis. His every attempt to restore unity was viewed with suspicion. To some, he was perceived as siding with Camilla, to others as too weak to confront the storm brewing under his own roof. But the most devastating blow came when details of his private arguments with William began to leak, first in whispers, then in full paragraphs inside tabloid exclusives. According to those briefed on the matter, father and son clashed over Catherine's treatment. William allegedly accused his father of allowing politics to poison the family, while Charles rebuked his son for failing to control his household. Their verbal exchange, meant to remain behind closed doors, reached the press through anonymous aides with divided loyalty. The result? A public image of a monarchy at war with itself. But then, in a twist no one could have foreseen, Queen Camilla introduced an unexpected name into the fray: Prince Harry. During a private conversation with one of the king's senior advisors, she reportedly questioned whether a similar public rift had not been allowed to fester years earlier with Charles's younger son. Was Catherine simply walking the same path? The comparison sent shockwaves through the palace. To some, it was a tactical masterstroke, equating Catherine's stance with the disruptive legacy of the Sussexes. To others, it was a dangerous escalation, dragging in old wounds to poison new ones. But even as the walls seemed to close in around her, Catherine made a move no one anticipated, one that would force the crown to reconsider its entire public strategy. She walked out in silence but made the loudest statement of her royal life. Catherine, refusing to cancel her next appearance, arrived in a crimson power suit and said everything without a single word. The palace couldn't ignore the message or the consequences. While the monarchy convulsed under the weight of its own contradictions, Catherine chose not to disappear. Despite mounting pressure from senior aides and multiple requests from behind palace walls to temporarily step back, she pushed forward defiantly, strategically, and unmistakably on her own terms. When the date of her next appearance approached, most assumed she would cancel or allow another royal to fill the role. But as the cameras turned and the press gathered, there she was, no husband, no senior staff flanking her, and certainly no apology in sight. The colour of her ensemble, bold, commanding crimson, was no accident. Known internally among royal stylists as War Room Red, the hue had historically been reserved for moments of extreme messaging. For Catherine, it became he, armour. Without uttering a single syllable, she reclaimed control of her public image, not through defiance but dominance. The crowd erupted, a sea of cheers rising up to meet her composed presence. Yet behind closed doors, the response was far less celebratory. King Charles, blindsided and reportedly seething, demanded to know why no one had informed him of her intent to proceed. He had expected compliance. What he received was a challenge to his authority at a time when the monarchy could ill afford division. Camilla, equally blindsided, responded in her own way. Hours after Catherine's appearance dominated headlines, the Queen Consort quietly cancelled her scheduled engagement at Windsor. No reason was given, no statement released. But insiders understood the gesture for what it was: a withdrawal. Not of defeat, but of disapproval, a silent protest against being overshadowed by the very woman she hoped to discipline. But it was Catherine's manner, not just her appearance, that left the deepest impression. Observers noted the smallest details, decoding every motion. There was no fidgeting, no nervous twirl of her wedding ring, just unwavering focus and piercing eye contact. Not once did she offer the traditional smile that softened her public persona. This was not the Catherine of charity galas and royal christenings. This was a woman who had crossed a threshold and returned, changed. The moment ignited a media firestorm. Commentators began calling it Catherine's quiet revolution. The term spread like wildfire across tabloids, social media, and television panels. Suddenly, she wasn't just a royal caught in the middle. She was a symbol of resilience against the rigid scaffolding of outdated power. Her gesture became a rallying point for those within and outside the monarchy disillusioned with the hierarchy's grip on authenticity. Yet, with the public embracing her récit. NG independence. The firm could no longer afford to view this as a passing act of resistance. Catherine had shifted the energy inside the monarchy, and it terrified those accustomed to absolute control. Because if one royal could break away from the script and win the people's admiration doing so, others might follow. The institution had no choice but to respond, and not with words or press statements. The old tools of persuasion had failed. This time they would reach deep into the past, into the mechanisms long left dormant. A council silent, secretive, and cloaked in tradition was being reassembled. One not seen for decades, but feared by every royal who knew its power. But while the world watched the princess rise, behind the scenes the monarchy scrambled to reassert control. And that meant resurrecting an old institution with chilling authority. It hasn't been summoned in over 3 decades. But King Charles, under mounting pressure and emotional strain, called for the reconvening of the Royal Advisory Council, a shadowy institution whose purpose is to discipline, silence, or remove. And Catherine's name was at the top of the docket. Most people don't even know it exists. The Royal Advisory Council, older than the Commonwealth, older than the very idea of constitutional monarchy itself, was created not to govern but to protect the crown from threats within. It operates in the dark corners of tradition, where loyalty is tested in silence and consequences are dealt without ceremony. Its last documented meeting was held in the aftermath of the Charles and Diana debacle, when the public's faith in the monarchy teetered on collapse. But this time, it wasn't about scandal, it was about control. Catherine's rising influence, her refusal to retreat, and her growing connection with the public had pushed the institution toward a reckoning. And Charles, facing the possibility at his son's wife had become the most powerful voice inside the firm, did what monarchs rarely do in modern times. He called upon the ancient machine of royal containment. The council was quietly reassembled, piece by piece. It included senior peers from the House of Lords, a select group of religious authorities, royal legal officers, and 2 members of the Privy Council known for their discretion. The rules were strict: no press, no aides, no transcripts. The meeting was to be held under the same silence that cloaked its very existence, and at its centre was one singular topic: the Princess of Wales. Leaks from inside the palace suggested that she had been labelled behind closed doors as potentially insubordinate. A dangerous phrase. Not illegal, not criminal, but disruptive to the balance of the monarchy, and that, in this world, was enough to trigger intervention. Yet not everyone at that table agreed with the king's course of action. Some council members pushed back, questioning whether this was truly a matter of loyalty or something far more personal. Was Catherine being punished for her popularity, for her refusal to yield? One lord reportedly cautioned Charles that pressing forward could rupture generational support for the monarchy. Another raised concerns about the optics of targeting the one royal figure whose integrity still held firm in the eyes of the people. And in the middle of these tense deliberations loomed the name no one dared to invoke too loudly: William. If the council moved against his wife, there would be no guarantee of his cooperation. In fact, some feared it could provoke the very fracture they were hoping to prevent. Inside the walls of power, nothing felt secure anymore. The firm lines between family and institution had blurred beyond recognition. Allies were turning into liabilities, secrets were turning into weapons, and with each that passed without resolution, the monarchy's foundation trembled beneath the weight of its own internal war. There were whispers that should Catherine be censured by the council, it could set off a constitutional crisis, even affect the line of succession. But Charles, under siege from all sides, seemed determined to remind the family and the nation that the crown is not shared. It is inherited, upheld, and when necessary, defended by any means. But, just as the council plotted behind closed doors, a powerful voice from inside the monarchy shattered the silence with devastating effect. He had stayed silent until now. Prince William, caught between his father and his wife, made an unthinkable threat behind palace walls: "If she goes, I go." And with those words he changed the royal line of succession forever. The weight of the crown had always loomed large over William, but nothing in his years of preparation could have readied him for this collision. The Royal Advisory Council's reconvening had rattled more than just palace tradition. It had triggered something personal, something raw. For days, William had endured the quiet maneuverings, the whispered condemnations of Catherine, the unspoken expectation that he too would toe the line of royal obedience. But the tipping point came when he learned the full extent of the council's discussions. Catherine's name wasn't just mentioned, it was dissected, debated, and framed in the language of instability, as if the very woman he loved, the mother of his children, had become a constitutional inconvenience. That was the moment William dropped the mask. Without warning, he entered the room where the council was meeting. Eyewitnesses would later describe it as a moment unlike any in recent royal history. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make a speech. He delivered one sentence: "If she goes, I go." The room froze. Every tradition, every code of protocol, shattered in a single breath. William, the heir to the throne, had issued what amounted to a royal ultimatum. He wasn't threatening rebellion, he was threatening removal. And behind that threat was a lifetime of pent-up frustration. For too long, he had watched women in his family be swallowed by duty. Diana, then Meghan. And now they were circling Catherine, cloaking their intentions in centuries-old custom. He saw the pattern. He would not allow history to repeat itself. Within hours, the palace began to fracture. Reports of secret meetings between William and the Lord Chamberlain leaked to the press, stirring a frenzy. Speculation erupted. Was the prince preparing to abdicate his future role? Was this the beginning of a royal split that could shake the monarchy to its core? The tension between father and son, already volatile, exploded. Staff described hearing raised voices from opposite ends of the palace, doors slammed, aides sent running between offices. The confrontation between Charles and William, leaked almost in full to a trusted royal correspondent, became the most explosive moment yet. In it, William accused his father of protecting tradition over truth. Charles, in turn, accused his son of betrayal. There was no resolution, only silence. And yet, outside those walls, something extraordinary was happening. Public support for the Waleses surged. Editorials lauded William's defense of his wife as principled and long overdue. Social media overflowed with praise for his bravery, with hashtags demanding the monarchy modernize or move aside. The carefully controlled public image of the royal family was unraveling. And still, the rumors persisted. Some claimed William was drafting a private plan to step back from senior royal duties if Catherine were formally censured. Others whispered of a quiet proposal to establish a separate, independent branch of the monarchy, answerable not to the crown but to the people. Through it all, Catherine remained silent, not out of fear but out of trust. William had stepped into the fire for her, and in doing so, he had redrawn the boundaries of royal power. No longer was she the target of whispered doubt, now she stood as the line that could not be crossed. But while William stood firm, Queen Camilla made her most daring move, yet one designed to outplay everyone in the game. While the family fractured around her, Queen Camilla plotted her next move with surgical precision. One phone call, one leaked document, and one loyal ally set in motion a scandal that could end Catherine's reign for good. She had waited, observed, calculated. While Charles floundered in emotional turmoil, and William waged open war against the institution, Camilla remained eerily composed. She knew better than to fight Catherine in public. The Princess of Wales had captured the heart of the people. Direct confrontation would be suicide. Instead, Camilla took the quieter route, the deadlier one. She reached out to an old ally in the House of Lords, a nobleman whose loyalty had been forged decades earlier during the turbulence of Charles's first marriage. Together, they unearthed an archaic mechanism known only to the most senior inner circle, the duty review. Cloaked in bureaucratic neutrality, It was a powerful tool, one that allowed the Crown to privately evaluate whether a working royal was still fit, emotionally and mentally, to serve. And just like that, whispers began to surface. The first leak was subtle. A respected columnist alluded to concerning gaps in Catherine's recent calendar, followed by suggestions that she had withdrawn from private patron meetings without explanation. Then came the second blow. An anonymous insider hinted that the princess had expressed distress during a recent family engagement, prompting internal concern. Though no names were attached to the sources, the direction was unmistakable. The narrative was shifting, bending just enough to create the illusion of instability. Questions were now being asked not about Catherine's strength, but her emotional capacity to lead. The timing was no coincidence. Camilla's fingerprints were all over it, and yet no proof existed. That was her genius, never attacking directly, but guiding the dagger into place with practiced grace. Behind palace doors, Charles grew increasingly conflicted. He had not wanted to escalate the matter, but with pressure mounting from Camilla's camp and murmurs of constitutional duty hanging in the air, he found himself cornered. The Queen Consort reportedly urged him to act, to initiate a formal review before the situation spiraled further, but Charles hesitated. Some aides said he feared provoking William further. Others believed he knew the truth, that Catherine, in her silence, had already won the public's loyalty in a way that couldn't be undone. Still, Camilla pushed. Her final move was bold and chilling. She was seen entering the private estate of a long-retired royal advisor known for one infamous connection, Edward VIII. The man who once quietly crafted the abdication framework for a king who defied royal expectation. What advice did she seek there? And why now? Within hours, courtiers noted a new urgency in Camilla's tone. She wanted the review formalized, the questions asked aloud, the doubt planted so deep it could not be dismissed. Her goal wasn't just to silence Catherine, it was to destabilize her image, to make the future queen appear fragile, flawed and unfit. But even as she orchestrated her quiet war, a force outside her control was preparing to intervene. One she had not anticipated, one that didn't carry a royal title but had the power to shift the entire game. But the crown was about to receive. I've a letter hand-delivered that would change everything. And it didn't come from within the family. When the monarch falters, the government watches. And when whispers of crisis turn into thunder, Downing Street steps in. In an extraordinary break from protocol, the Prime Minister personally intervened in the royal dispute, and not in the way King Charles expected. For weeks, the British government had remained publicly silent, respecting the delicate balance between Crown and Parliament. But behind the scenes, the anxiety was growing. What began as an internal family fracture had now ballooned into a constitutional distraction. The monarchy, meant to be the unshakable symbol of unity, had become a lightning rod for division. With headlines spinning out of control, the public openly taking sides and whispers of abdication and duty reviews dominating the airwaves, the Prime Minister could no longer afford to watch from the sidelines. A private audience was requested not by tradition, but by necessity, and King Charles, already emotionally drained and politically embattled, agreed. But what was meant to be a routine briefing turned into a moment of reckoning. Sources inside Whitehall confirmed that the conversation was direct, pointed, and uncomfortable. The Prime Minister raised concerns over growing instability, not just within the royal family but across the country. National unity was fracturing, and confidence in the crown was slipping. The message was clear: the palace could no longer afford to indulge in internal power struggles. The political consequences were beginning to mount. And then came the sharpest reminder of all. Catherine is not simply a wife. She is the future Queen Consort, the bridge between generations, and a vital part of the monarchy's long-term image. Targeting her, diminishing her, or forcing her into the shadows was no longer just a royal disease. Ion. It had become a national concern. The conversation sent shockwaves through the palace. Senior aides were stunned that the Prime Minister would dare intervene so boldly. Camilla was reportedly livid, calling the move an unprecedented breach of boundaries. But the damage had been done. For the first time, King Charles found himself being cornered not by his family but by the very government he once thought would never interfere. Those close to him said he left the meeting visibly distressed, even shaken. His usual confidence was replaced by something quieter, heavier. Isolation settled in. Trusted allies grew scarce. Some believed he had lost control not just of the family, but of the institution he had waited a lifetime to lead. Inside the palace, strategies began to shift. The quiet campaign against Catherine lost momentum. The media tone softened. A planned review was quietly paused. And Camilla, once the shadow strategist, found herself facing the limits of her influence. The monarchy had reached its inflection point, and the crown so often shielded from outside pressure was now caught between duty and survival. But while the political elite and royal advisors scrambled to stabilize the throne, all eyes turned to Catherine once more. Because the one voice that had remained silent throughout this storm was finally preparing to speak. As power shifted and loyalties blurred, Catherine's next appearance would answer every question and rewrite the royal narrative forever. She walked through the palace gates with her head high and the weight of the monarchy on her shoulders. After weeks of silence, scrutiny, and scheming, Catherine emerged not as a victim but as the future of the crown, and her first words left the world in stunned silence. No announcement preceded her arrival. No press statement teased the event. And yet, the world watched. Cameras clicked. The air tensed. What began as a routine opening of a children's mental health initiative became something else entirely, an unscripted reckoning. Catherine stood alone. No William at her side. No palace aides steering the moment. Just her voice, her presence, and the deep quiet of anticipation. The months of royal warfare, whispers of abdication, council meetings, leaked documents, Camilla's silent strikes had all led to this singular instant. And in 5 minutes, everything changed. Her speech wasn't grandiose. It was grounded. She spoke not of titles or duty, but of endurance. She spoke of strength learned in silence, of motherhood under scrutiny, of legacy shaped not in privilege, but in persistence. She spoke of change not as threat, but as promise. As her words echoed beyond the hall, something rare happened. People wept. Journalists, seasoned and cynical, lowered their pens. Even critics who had long doubted her role admitted they had misjudged her. This wasn't a speech. It was a declaration. Not of war, not of revenge, but of rebirth. Catherine had endured the crown's darkest machinery and emerged not only standing but stronger and more certain of who she was than ever before. And perhaps most powerful of all, her message contained no accusation. She didn't name names. She didn't point fingers. She simply stood in truth, and the world responded with thunderous approval. The palace issued a carefully worded statement acknowledging her appearance. It was brief, polite, impersonal. But those reading between the lines noticed what mattered most. Camilla's name was absent. For the first time in months, the Queen consort vanished from the headlines, her influence seemingly receding into the background. Insiders whispered that King Charles watched the broadcast in private, alone. What he saw, according to one source, moved him in a way nothing else had. There was no public comment from the monarch, but his tone reportedly softened in meetings the following day. For a king struggling to hold a fractured family together, Catherine's grace had done what no advisor could. It reminded him of the crown's enduring power when wielded with empathy. And in the quiet that followed, a new image emerged. William and Catherine, once embattled, now seemed unbreakable. Their public outings resumed with newfound confidence. The smiles were no longer forced, the glances no longer staged. They had weathered the storm and come through it bonded by fire. The public, once skeptical, now rallied behind them with fervor. Polls soared, headlines shifted, and slowly the monarchy's image began to heal, not through command, but through Catherine's quiet defiance and unwavering resolve. The storm may have passed, but the monarchy will never be the same again. Because behind every crown is a reckoning. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.